Good day, learners. Today we are going to look at a poem entitled Winter by Judith Nichols. But before we get started on the poem, I'd like you to think about the connotations for you of the word winter. When I hear the word winter, I think of cold, warm jackets, boots, thick socks, pancakes, soups, fireplace, hot chocolate. The list is endless. But bearing all that in mind, let's read our poem together and then we will do the analysis. Winter by Judith Nichols. Winter slowly crept through the whispering wood, hushing fir and oak, crushing each leaf and froze each web, but never a word he spoke. Winter prowled by the shivering sea, lifting sand and stone, nipped each limpet silently, and then moved on. Winter raced down the frozen stream, catching at his breath. On his lips were icicles, at his back was death. Just a 15-line little poem, 3 stanzas, and now we are going to look at each stanza in a little bit more detail. In stanza 1, line 1, it starts off with winter crept. And it's interesting to note the choice of verb, crept, implying it was a slow, almost quiet motion. In stanza 2, in line 6, the poem says winter prowled. So prowled is more like a predator, like a wild animal. Not quite as quiet as crept, a little bit more intimidating. In stanza 3, in line 13, it says winter raced fast. The speed has increased and winter is almost unstoppable in stanza 3. Let's go back to stanza 1. Winter crept through the whispering wood. We see here we have a figure of speech. Can you recognize the figure of speech in line 2? Whispering wood. That's right, it is a form of alliteration because both words begin with W. At the same time, the phrase whispering wood could be an example of what other figure of speech? Personification. Quite right, because a wood cannot whisper, but a people can whisper. I want you to notice as we go through this poem, through the stanzas, that winter is personified. What do I mean when I say winter is personified? Winter is given the characteristics of a person. In fact, it is a person who is harsh, impolite, and out to do damage. Think of someone who's quite destructive. Back to stanza 1. Winter crept through the whispering wood, hushing fir and oak. Hushing is a way of saying shh, be quiet. And if winter is hushing fir and oak, that implies that the trees were making noise. The trees were in fact quite noisy. So here comes winter telling them to be quiet. How can trees be noisy? You know what comes to my mind? I think of maybe in the autumn it was windy and the wind was blowing through the branches of the trees and the leaves were all rushing together, and that creates some idea of the trees making a noise, maybe even talking to each other. Winter crept through the whispering wood, hushing fir and oak, crushed each leaf. Look at the verbs. They are now quite negative. Crushed, froze. In fact, they are not just negative, but it's, like I said earlier, it's a bit destructive, isn't it? crushed each leaf, and froze each web. I especially find froze to be quite negative, because if you think about a web, a spider's web, it's a delicate, or any insect's web, it's a very delicate thing. And here it's frozen in place by rather harsh winter. You'll notice that there is the dash at the end of the line, froze each web. And then it's followed by, but never a word he spoke. So winter itself, personified as a person, is rather silent. He's a quiet person, again linking to the idea of a predator, because a predator moves silently, isn't it? So that it can approach its prey undetected. In stanza 2, we read, winter prowled. And this is very clearly like an animal seeking a prey. Prowl, almost in search of, by the shivering sea. So we notice that stanza 2 is clearly repeating stanza 1 in terms of structure. We again have the alliteration, shivering sea, the S and the S. We also have the personification. A sea cannot shiver, people only shiver. So we have alliteration and personification. Lifting sand and stone, further alliteration. So how does winter lift sand and stone? I think it could be an occasional gust of wind that is blowing, that seems to sweep the sand up from the ground. Nipped each limpet silently. Now, what are nips? Think of a puppy. If you've ever had a little puppy and he comes with those little teeth and he's quite playful, and he comes and he makes those small bites on your pants and your ankles and your heels, those are what we call nips. So here it says, winter nipped each limpet silently. Now, what are limpets? Limpets are mollusks. They are related to the snail family, and you may have seen them if you've gone to the beach. You find them particularly in rock pools and on rocks. They are stuck, and it's really difficult to get these shell creatures detached from the rock that they attach themselves to. So winter nipped each limpet silently and then moved on. And the idea is that winter is unable to detach the mollusk, this little shell creature, from the rock. So he just gives them these little bites and winter rushes past. In stanza 3, I want you to note winter is rushing. So the intensity builds, the tempo becomes faster from crept, prowled, and raced. Winter raced down the frozen stream, catching at his breath, meaning that winter was running so fast he had to catch his breath. On his lips were icicles. Now, icicles are, of course, the visible proof or evidence of the cold. Icicles, which means any moisture, they literally freeze when being exposed to the cold. On his lips were icicles, at his back was death. Now, there are two very interesting things in stanza, well, actually more than two, but for our purposes right now, in stanza 3. Firstly, winter is not just personified as the animal, as you've seen earlier, but now it's personified in very human terms, because there are human parts that are mentioned in stanza 3, and these words confirm the personification. Winter is compared now to a person. On his lips, at his back. At his back was death. And that's a very strong line to end the little poem on, because at its back, meaning what is behind winter personified as a person. So when winter leaves, when winter passes, death follows. Everything, well, most things behind or left behind die, are dying, or are dead. So I think it's fair to say that Judith Nichols, the writer of the poem, sees death as being alive, like a person, like an animal. But at the same time, she sees death as bringing, she sees winter as bringing death. So my question to you is, how does the speaker see winter? In a positive light or in a negative light? Only you can decide, and you need to, of course, have reasons for that. That's Winter by Judith Nichols. In conjunction with this analysis of the poem, you have 10 questions which you will find in your Google Classroom that go with your poem that you need to answer. Again, I'm reminding you to answer each question carefully and to develop your answer as best as you can. Only quote when asked to quote. When you do answer, use your own words as far as possible. Thank you.